For some unknown reason, Su Luxia was linked with the female lead system to commute between multiple small worlds to change the fates of discarded women for compensation. However, it seemed that Su was having the time of her life as she cross-dressed a blue-haired lad to his agitation. She also loved admiring her matchless beauty in front of the mirror and staring at her reflection for hours. Sometimes, she was also found watching movies while munching on snacks. Tired of her careless attitude, her pink plushy-type accomplice, wrathfully reminded her about their actual mission. Su pacified the pink plushie with a glorious smile, remarking about herself not being the devil he thought. Su's target was a redhead she-devil with immense innocence on her face, who ascertains the doting emperor that Su is not bad at all and that he must not blame her for anything. Su despised the scoundrel emperor who was cheating behind her back and scorned her, saying her title of noble wife would be stripped off, leaving her a mere mistress. A timid side character was also a part of the whole puzzle, a soft-hearted male helping Su from the side. In short, the whole issue is about a noble wife who was considered crap by her lousy husband for not giving him an heir, and how she would be facing and solving that issue. A manly voice roared inside the magnanimous palace, reprimanding Su Luxia. Haplessly, Su was roughly tossed to the ground, while she yelled in despair that she had nothing to be afraid of. With sheer hatred in her eyes, Su termed the redhead characterless as she dared to seduce her man at the palace gates, and she, being the noble wife, had full rights to discipline that cow. Deeply flushed, the redhead stuttered and tried to explain her position to the emperor. A slippery man deeply in love gently held the redhead's hand and assured her that he had full confidence in her innocence. Closely embracing the redhead, the emperor scornfully announced that an order should be passed that Su should be demoted from a noble wife to an ordinary mistress due to her spite. A hurt look appeared on Su's face as she stared at the emperor in disbelief. Then the doting emperor turned to his beloved redhead, aka noble lady Liu, who was still very much baffled and petrified by the current situation. Blinded with beguile, the emperor saw everything bright and nice about Liu, calling her highly cultured and immensely polite. Also, she followed rules and regulations religiously. He threw a bomb that the redhead Liu was about to give an heir to the throne. That's why she was eligible to become the noble wife, and Liu was delightfully surprised that her beau knew. Drenched in love, the emperor stated as they were about to leave Su's room that he rushed to her as soon as the doctor broke the news. But Su spoiled the moment and Liu still defended her. Out of shock, Su harshly tried to confirm the emperor's revelation, and a frowning emperor turned around her. With grief engraved on her face, Su pointed at Liu, querying the emperor that the morally loose Liu was actually carrying his child. Having a detested expression, the slicker warned Su that he could not allow her to harm Liu and their child. Su burst into maniacal laughter, and those painful words pierced her heart. Those gold springs welled up, as she couldn't believe that the emperor still didn't trust her even after 4 years of their relationship. Even the symbol of betrayal was forced to shut his mouth for a moment when an agonized Su reminded him of the first year of their marriage when she drank the cup of poison set for him. Next, she nudged him that when the Thoth tribes rebelled, he led the soldiers to attack, while she was the one begging her father and brothers in the freezing night to send extra help. And then one fateful night, before he ascended the throne, the king of rebels launched a revolution, but she was the one who took the killer attack by shielding him. The gold springs began to flow freely when dolefully Su probed the heartless man whether she had fallen short in any situation. Seemed like the ice melted a little as the emperor searched for a proper reply. Out of the blue, with a great thump, 2 fragile knees slammed to the ground in desperation. Greatly astonished, a fretful emperor turned to the grieving Liu, who had stooped down completely as her face touched the ground, begging forgiveness for Su. Doll-faced Liu raised her crystal blue eyes traced with slight terror, quite concerned that Su's family's influence was great, and if they learned about her agony, they might become wrathful. Tears rolled down her clear cheeks when Liu grabbed the emperor's robe and proclaimed that she didn't want to trouble her, so he must forgive Su. A volcanic Su burst out in sheer fury with molten lava overflowing from her fiery eyes, insulting Liu. Softened by Liu's tears, the emperor held her hand affectionately and consoled her that even though she didn't want to trouble him, he didn't want her to suffer as well. Quite sternly, the emperor passed a royal order that since the general's daughter Su must learn her manners, she would be put under house arrest to rethink her actions and words. In the harshest possible way, the emperor proclaimed that people change. But according to him, Su had changed very rapidly into a venomous snake-like wife that he didn't recognize anymore. Both Liu and the emperor departed, banging the door behind them, leaving Su to sullen over her fate. Suddenly, Su broke into maniacal laughter. Pain flowing from those gold mines, Su jerked her head back and cackled incessantly, wondering whether it was she or her faithless husband who had changed. In a trice, Su hysterically banged her forehead on the wall, weeping continuously. Despite his beguiling ways, Su's heart still bled for him and called out for him desperately. She was fretting over her fate like a damsel in distress in an old school painting when a sharp beeping sound emerged out of the blue. The hoot continued, followed by a message flashed in Su's mind that a host was entering and reading her memories. After a few seconds, a message emerged that the reading of the data was complete and all restrictions had been removed. Instantaneously, Su's eyes popped open. Startled, she grabbed her throbbing head when a cute beaver suddenly emerged on her shoulder, frantically nibbling a green stalk, but the pink plushie could be seen only by the host. Alarmed that the real owner of the body, who was the infertile wife, seemed quite merciless since that self-destructive blow gave her an ugly bump on the forehead. Busy chomping down his snack, the pink plushie reminded her of the real reason the management arranged for Su to help the unfortunate wife reverse her fate and change her life. As mentioned earlier, for completing every mission, Su Luxia was rewarded with an achievement that could be exchanged for small props in the system's lottery. With utmost confidence, Su was proud of her mission rate being 100% to date. With the help of her system, Su decided to look at the background information of the world. Excitedly, the pink plushie narrated the story of the novel about a female lead, Liu Ruyan, who was reborn and dominated the harem. Liu died tragically in her former life and was reborn, but she used her past knowledge and killed everyone in her way, leading herself to live a long and happy life with the emperor. Su put off the plushie as if to shut the system. Apprehensively, she analyzed that her current self was the first favored wife Liu kicked off her life after reincarnating. Her contempt was so deep-rooted that Liu didn't stop there, as Su's whole family was ruined, including her parents and siblings. Su gently touched her forehead bruise, and her hand was slightly stained with blood. She realized that the current situation was quite tricky. So feared that she might have acquired an ugly concussion on her head. For this reason, she was unable to find a quick solution to the prevailing problem. Alarmed that Su might be losing her marbles, the pink plushie was a little petrified. Poor plushie was absolutely right about her recovering mental state as Su exuberantly grabbed him, stroked him hysterically, and joked that he may not want to suffer from heat stroke in winter. A while later, something was slid under the door into the emperor's room. Meanwhile, the emperor was about to stamp a seal on a document. It was revealed that a terrorized pink plushie, who had transformed into an envelope, was earlier slid through the door, and the emperor was about to stamp his back. Pink plushie squirmed with pain as the emperor had used all his might on his backside. A neat seal was placed on the bottom left corner of the envelope. Later, a maniacal chortle echoed from a palace chamber. It was Su who was laughing so hard that tears began to shed from her eyes as she proclaimed that camouflaging mushrooms was so useful in getting a royal order like that. In reality, poor plushie had been fed with a camouflaging mushroom and transformed into an envelope to be sealed by the emperor. An excited Su checked out the seal imprinted on his buns. Camouflage mushrooms were a rank C item. Eating them could disguise private and confidential documents, however, they were effective for a mere 3 hours. Humiliated to the core, the still disguised pink plushie gave a shut-up call to Su in frustration. Su checked herself in the mirror and commented that with an imperial order she could be perfectly justified in adopting a young prince. Her action aroused the pink plushie's curiosity about taking so much pain in attempting to pass a false royal decree. Instead, she could have easily sentenced Liu Ruyan to death. Serenely, Su remarked that killing a pig with a blunt knife would yield more pain, as she wanted to give her enemy a slow and torturous death. As the light breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, Su and the pink plushie set out to rummage the surroundings to find a perfect son to adopt. Suddenly, The plushie pointed at a bubbly child, however, a selective Sue immediately rejected him. The little boy seemed too cheerful for her likes, as she wanted to adopt a prim and proper prince and not start a comedy circus. Next, the plushie hesitantly pointed at another one. Termed too skinny, the young boy was also declined by the choosy madame, as she was afraid he might be sick and might reach heaven before she could raise him up. The pink plushie diverted her attention toward a crybaby who was wailing at the top of his lungs, but he was rejected as the emperor would die of old age by the time the baby grew up. An agitated plushie pointed at a young boy smiling gracefully, however. Sue rejected him, as well as he was the eldest son of a very decent wife, and laying an eye on him meant instant death. At that point, the lava boiling inside the plushie burst out as he yelled in Sue's ears that they were here to adopt a prince and not to buy vegetables in a market. So when the pinky glared at Sue hard, the picky accuser had to give up on her endeavors. Anxiously, Sue looked around to pick the most suitable boy within her range of sight. Her golden eyes were wide open when she suddenly found the jewel she was looking for. A young boy with a gloomy face sat on the stairs of a house. Instantly, the fury on the pink plushie was wiped out, and his face lit with surprise when he recognized the doleful boy as the fourth young prince whose parents had already died. The decent wife took in the unfortunate boy for 2 years, and then he was tossed around to another noble lady. An exhilarated Sue, counting on her fingers the fortune she could make, remarked that both the boy and she were fated to be together. Meanwhile, the unfortunate boy was sad and hungry because his caretaker had cut down on his meals again. Out of the blue, a voice inquired about the granny being in charge at that place, and instantly the boy raised his head. An astonished boy found a beautiful lady introducing herself as Lady Sue from Prosperity Palace, and the most remarkable thing was that she knew his name was Yun Ling. Hastily, the young lad stood up, bowed, and paid his respects to the lady. Closely, an old woman dashed through upon spotting Lady Sue and kneeled down completely to pay her respects to Lady Sue. Amusingly, the pink plushie termed Sue as S-O-F-I, as if souffle in Chinese, or translated to English as Sophie, a tampon brand in China. Beamingly, Sue warned the plushie whether he wanted a heat stroke again, and the latter shook himself violently. Inquisitively, the old lady raised her head as if to know the reason Sue had visited her. Sue confirmed whether she was Yun Ling's caretaker. Next, she informed the old lady about the emperor's order, allowing her to take responsibility for Yun Ling. The old lady was ordered to gather her things and prepare to go to the royal palace. Instantly, the old lady's face illuminated with a brilliant smile. However, the young lad was still very unhappy, and his head was lowered for some reason. With a bright smile, Sue wondered whether Yun Ling was ready to come with her, as she had forgotten to take his consent first. With his big blue eyes full of apprehension, Yun Ling stuttered out of confusion. Slyly, the old lady pushed him ominously, and with a huge grin assured Sue that her young master was more than willing to accompany Sue. Granny's wittiness was instantly spotted by a shrewd Sue, who stormed at the lady for her peevishness. She cried in sheer fury, reprimanding the old lady for having the nerve to push a prince and offending her superior Lady Sue. Still kneeling in front of Sue, the old lady trembled in fright, wondering when did she become Sue's servant. However, Sue turned away, dragging Yun Ling along and commanding her guards to take that abominable servant away and cut off her hand that pushed Yun Ling. Behind her, the old lady cried and begged for mercy. However, Sue aloofly headed her way. While they were walking, Yun Ling took a sneak peek behind and then at the beautiful princess. His little Nick was quickly caught by the clever Sue, who grimly inquired whether his heart had mellowed down because of his granny, and the bewildered prince immediately denied. Sue affectionately ruffled Yun Ling's hair. Next, she gazed at him with concern, ready to impart some advice. She stared intently into his aqua eyes, stating that he was a prince, a descendant of the emperor, and her adopted child, so he must not allow anyone to bully him and should learn to be a leader. Those mesmerizing pools of aquamarine began to flow continuously due to an emotional surge. He couldn't control himself, so Yun Ling ran away, roughly wiping off his eyes and assuring a stunned Sue that he would never disappoint her. Munching merrily, the pink plushie felt sorry for the good little puppy to be brought up by Sue to become a cruel wolf. Grimly, Sue informed the plushie that in the original story, even before Liu's child was born, the evil granny wore poor Yunling down, and he eventually died. Quivering with emotion, forgetting all about his delicious snack, the plushie wondered whether Sue chose Yunling for that reason. Sobbing in awe, the pink plushie admitted that Sue was really a virtuous person. Instantly, Sue put a break on the plushie's melodrama, declaring that he was overthinking. To the plushie's great disappointment, Sue clarified that the group of young princes lost to Liu Ruyan's son. That's why she had chosen someone who had no hope in the fight for the throne. With a victorious gleam in her eyes, Sue was hopeful that a miracle was about to take place in the form of Yunling. A lavish feast was laid in front of Yunling, and the poor starving child devoured everything hungrily. Both Sue and the pink plushie observed him from the window and wondered for how long the miserable kid had been starved by that wretched old lady. A kind-hearted Sue smiled affectionately, stating the reason she didn't join Yunling for the meal was that she didn't want to embarrass him and wanted him to eat as much as his little heart desired. Also, she guessed that the news of her adopting the fourth prince had already been circulated throughout the palace, and now it was time for Liu Ruyan to make her move. Her prediction was on target since she received an invitation to a banquet arranged by Liu Ruyan that night. Freaking out, the plushie wondered what that wretched Liu was cooking up in her little head, while Sue smiled and speculated that Liu just wanted to investigate the falsified order. Not only that, but she might want to delve into the matter of the crime of adopting a young prince without authorization. The pink plushie was about to explode in terror as he desperately begged his esteemed host Sue to swiftly think of a solution. He paced back and forth anxiously until his overcooked brain was about to burst out as he remembered that they were dealing with a harem battle. So when did the adoption appear? Panic struck, the plushie took a leap and with tears rolling down his cheek, gave Sue ridiculous advice to give herself a makeover to attract the emperor, but Sue reminded him of a wise saying. With softness in her gaze, she petted the plushie, stating that a respected son increased his mother's honor. Meanwhile, Liu was lazing out on a couch when a maid explained that faking an imperial order was a punishable crime leading to a death sentence, so she didn't think that Sue was that stupid. With her eyes closed, Liu idly commented that Sue was an idiot as she only got her noble wife status due to her looks and family background. With a steely glint in her blue eyes, Liu was glad that at present the emperor had already abandoned her and had completely ignored her family's backing. According to Liu, if only Sue had brains, she would not have been making her move, but sitting like a lifeless decoration piece. A sinister smirk appeared on her face when she discussed Sue's lunacy of actually forging a royal order in her frenzy and then using the fact that she adopted a young prince to cover up. Buttering up her mistress further, the maid called her wise and guessed that if this matter was exposed, even Sue's maiden family would bear the consequences. Tired of chit-chatting, Liu ordered the maid to find that white moon dress for the grand banquet. Confidently, she stated that the emperor adored her in plain and neat clothes. Instantly, the maid obliged readily. As the inkiness of the night fell upon the magnificent Prosperity Palace, glowing like a full moon, Liu stood in the banquet hall along with her doting husband, ready to welcome her guests. As the splendidly carved doors were opened, the maids announced that Lady Sue had arrived. Austerely, the emperor raised his head. He glimpsed at the fully decked-up Sue as she was desperate to get her noble consort title back, as she didn't want others to term her Lady Tampon or Sophie in Chinese. Slippery like an eel, the emperor was enticed to see Sue's ethereal beauty. Even the maids envied her amazing get-up and paid compliments to her makeup as well as her complexion. Seemingly unaffected by the emperor's rising fascination for Sue, a beaming Liu proclaimed that Sue's delayed arrival at her place made her imply her unwillingness to enter her place. A cutting remark came Liu's way from Sue, asking whether Liu had done anything to offend her. Liu Ruyan's eyes popped open when she tried to comprehend Sue's statement. Instantly, Sue made her point that if she hadn't, then Liu should not have said such vague words. Liu's face turned a baked tomato when Sue stated that such meaningless declarations made Liu appear idiotic. A humiliated Liu turned her distressed face towards the emperor as if complaining about Sue's boorish attitude, and the emperor displeasingly called out to Sue, Unexpectedly, Sue's twin pools of gold were filled with water as she secretly referred to Liu, but she was not the only one who had shed crocodile tears. Even the emperor was flabbergasted because Sue rarely cried. Dramatically, Sue wiped off her tears with her sleeve and casually dropped a bomb. She was not crying since there was nothing to cry about, as now she had a son. Both the emperor and Liu Ruyan were hit by firecrackers when Sue's absurd proclamation hit their ears. Somewhat flustered, Liu tried to smile forcefully, informing the emperor that even she had heard a rumor about Sue taking in a son, and Liu didn't want the emperor to catch everything from Sue. Out of the blue, the emperor rushed towards Su Luxia and grabbed her arm, to both the lady's perplexity. With shadows of anxiety hovering on his face, the emperor confirmed with Su her claim of having a son. Instantly, Su pulled out her arm from the firm grip of the king. Pretending to appear sorrowful while rubbing her sore arm, Su revealed to the king that she had taken in the fourth prince, and from now onwards, he would be under her care. Wrath twisted the emperor's face dangerously. However, Sue's face was engraved with grief as she reminded the emperor about his promise that if she could not have a child, she could always adopt from other palace wives. A flashback is shown where an emperor was consoling a tragedy-hit Sue. He hugged a hysterically crying Sue, assuring her that since the poisoned wine had taken away her ability to bear any children, she could always adopt, but Sue was inconsolable. Unwaveringly, the emperor declared that Sue could adopt since the tragedy was not her fault. Things were quickly slipping out of Liu's hand, so she attempted to bring the king's attention to Sue's attempt to forge an imperial order. Gallantly, those golden twins were fixed on the trembling blue ones, demanding the validity of her information source because she went to get the child only on the king's word. Slyly, Sue put the whole mess onto Liu for getting fake information about the emperor putting out an imperial order. Those rosy red lips were about to throw lightning on the new player Liu. Sue came dangerously close to Liu, accusing her of having ill intentions and daring to spy on His Majesty since she was pregnant with an heir to the throne. Threatened by her icy tone, Liu was petrified and tried to step back, denying Sue's accusation. Liu went down on her knees, pleadingly tugging on his sleeve, clarifying that she only heard those rumors from one of Sue's maids who confided in her about the forged decree for adoption. Animatedly, Sue blamed Liu for implanting a spy in her palace and then turned to face the emperor, reminding him of Liu's highly cultured and drenched in politeness upbringing. Unexpectedly, the emperor drank in Sue's words and pulled away his arm from Liu's grasp, reprimanding her that this time she had crossed her limits. Rivers began to flow down those blue pools when a shocked Liu tried to stop her beloved emperor. But the damage had already been done as an upset emperor stormed out of the room. With a menacing smile, Sue bent down to Liu's level, mockingly expressing her disappointment in her for wanting to compete with her at that level of skill. Burning with fury, Liu Ruyan snarled maliciously at Su Luxia. After that fateful event, Su Luxia was finally in the comfort of her room, where the pinky plushie was admiring her wit and intelligence. Sue was tugging off the ornaments from her luscious long mane, while the plushie was rejoicing on her dressing table, stating that originally he wanted her to wear purple to please others. Thankfully, Sue had her own brilliant mind to follow, since she knew that men are visual creatures, and to capture the emperor's heart, one needed to think about attracting his attention. Also, she felt that shedding tears while wearing a shade of red caused a bigger emotional impact, arousing the pity of others more effectively. Exuberantly, the plushie was wondering whether they could continue to do some more crying sessions as Sue had become a pro at shedding crocodile tears. However, Sue rejected his idea, stroking her pet affectionately while imparting a free lesson to him, but the only reason those enticing tramps like Liu won was because they weren't concerned about their tainted image. She artfully winked at the pinky plushie and claimed that as soon as a white lotus like Liu's reputation got tarnished, she would never be able to recover it. The plushie fiercely applauded to celebrate her genius mind, stating that a king operated as violently as a Bengal carnivore. Later, a trembling voice begged Sue for mercy. The human transmitter who was earlier found lapping up Liu Ruyan was down on her knees in front of Sue, admitting her betrayal to her mistress. While sipping her tea, Sue reminded her that the last time she had taught Liu a lesson, the wily maid tattled the whole thing to the king, and this time she jabbered about the false decree. Sue referred to the maid as a very loyal dog to Liu Ruyan. But then she pointed out whether her mistress had mentioned the consequences she would have to face if caught in her treacherous actions. Panic struck, the maid touched her forehead to the ground, shaking madly and pleading for mercy. Sue was amused at the maid's condition, so she assured her not to be scared. She gently held her hand and clarified that she was not a cruel woman or something. Ominously, Sue grabbed the maid's chin and commanded her to spy on Liu as effectively as she had once spied on her, or else her family would suffer outside the walls of the palace. Sue gazed appallingly into the maid's terror-struck eyes and put the ball into her court. As the pink plushie saw the maid leaving the room, stumbling unsteadily on her feet, he wondered whether she could be trusted. Sue closed her eyes comfortably and speculated that the maid wouldn't be trustworthy in the beginning. However, the story would take a steep turn in the future. A puzzled expression appeared on the tiny cute face. In a shocking revelation, Sue mentioned that the maid was probably harboring some uncanny feelings for the 9th prince. However, the latter was completely smitten by Liu's charms. And a woman never tolerates sharing her man, even if it were a royal consort, and she imagined the jealous maid spying on the two lovebirds with an abominable expression. Sue felt a pang of pity for a woman's spiteful heart that could be quite intimidating. Next, quite leisurely, Sue imagined Liu Ruyan's expression at that time on finding a third wheeler in her love story, and with an amusing smirk felt really bad for her. Life had come to a routine when Yunling had regular lessons, especially under the supervision of Sue, who taught him about being a balanced, exemplary person. Between their lessons, a concerned Yunling informed her about the recent rumor that Lady Liu was often sending food to the Hall of Mental Cultivation, where the emperor spent his whole day. Sue assumed that Yunling was worried that Liu might take a chance to work against her. However, Yunling clarified that he could never dare to assume. Sue burst out in a merry chortle, petting the young prince's head. She ruffled his hair jubilantly, confirming his allegation that Liu would definitely take the chance against her. Slightly vexed, a flushed Yunling inquired Sue about her next move. Still beaming, Sue reminded Yunling of a terminology called outstanding tree that he had learned during his academics, but the taller trees got damaged from the wind first. Sue placed an assuring hand on Yunling's shoulder, implying that the bigger move Liu made, the more tragic outcome she would face. Next, the enticing consort reminded the prince about his father's birthday in a few days. She urged him to write a verse as a gift for him, but then she craftily winked at him so as not to put too much endeavor into it. Blankly, the prince gazed at his benefactress as if trying to read her mind. Instantly, his mind copied her thoughts, and then he paid his respects to her, assuring that he understood what she meant. Meanwhile, at the Hall of Mental Cultivation, a bewildered Liu explained the gifts sent by Sue on the emperor's birthday. Her eyes dazzled as she checked out the pile of precious jewels and artifacts, proclaiming that Sue was quite generous. Liu picked up a piece of jewelry made of a precious stone and remarked that the jaded alone was quite pricey. Liu cuddled closely to the emperor, making an absurd comment about Sue having great regard for the 4th prince as she treated him like a treasure. With a tedious expression and not taking his eyes off the book he was reading intently, the emperor inquired about the connection between those gifts and the 4th prince. Pretending to be shocked, Liu wondered whether the emperor didn't know that the jadeite bracelet was sent in Yunling's name. The emperor was not moved, since he thought it was only a bracelet. Liu instantly agreed with a twinkle in her eyes. Liu picked a grape from the nearby fruit bowl, remarking that she was just being trivial by informing him that the bracelet, no matter how brilliant it was presented by Sue's family as a welcoming gift to their grandson, and with that, she popped the grape into the emperor's mouth. She grinned ear to ear, making a point that considering Sue had been infertile for such a long time, and now she had a son after much effort, it was a celebratory moment for Sue's family. For the first time in that hour, the emperor raised his thoughtful eyes from the book as he analyzed that Liu's words were not without reason. A clandestine smile emerged on Liu's lips. She artfully pointed at the jadeite bangle on her wrist that the emperor once presented her, lauding it for being better than Sue's. Next, she placed Sue's bangle alongside the one she adorned and called out for her husband's attention. With puppy dog eyes, she buttered the emperor immensely by declaring that the one the emperor presented her was much better than Sue's jadate. With a sullen expression, the emotionally surged-up fool drooled over that creamy wrist like frosty snow and went beyond in puffing up Liu that her beauty was enough to topple cities. A flushed puppy dog stooped further, expressing her gratitude as she felt her appearance was mediocre compared to others, and the emperor had taken fancy to her out of pity. A strong grip sent chills down Liu's body, and even softer words melted her heart as the emperor whispered into Liu's ears how he wished everyone was as innocent as her in the harem. But Liu's needle was still stuck on her beloved older sister Sue as she craftily coaxed the emperor not to think ill of her, and the tempted emperor thought Liu was too kind-hearted. As Liu triumphantly swished her skirt to take her leave, a sinister smile brightened her face as she would love to witness how Su Luxia would plan to clean the mess Liu had just created. Panting heavily, the king's attendant picked up the gifts and queried the emperor about their placement. Indifferently, the king ordered the servant to put them away, while the jadeite bracelet should be given to Lady Liu. Bemused, the king pondered that Sue's family business was quite magnanimous, so hopefully they wouldn't care about giving away that present. With a deafening sneeze, Sue inquired Yunling about his constant muttering against her. Bizarrely dressed up like a young woman, the humiliated boy reasoned that since Lady Sue was not feeling well, he would take his leave. Insanely, Sue was not ready to let him go, since she wanted the terrified boy to drape on a new amber-colored dress material. Hilariously decked up like an Arabian princess, a humiliated Yunling fumed over by Sue's eerie display of affection and care toward him. Like a bolt out of the blue, it was announced that the emperor had arrived, leaving the poor lad more baffled than ever. Out of frenzy, Yunling hid behind Sue as the emperor bellowed suspiciously due to the wacky sight before him. Shocked to the core, the emperor was about to have a stroke when a grinning Sue forcibly pulled out a ridiculously dressed Yunling from behind and inquired about his valuable opinion. The deeply perplexed king confirmed with Su Luxia whether she actually knew that Yunling was a boy. Nonchalantly, Su remarked that it didn't matter since Yunling also liked it that way, while the poor boy shook like a frail leaf out of embarrassment behind her. Flushed like a tomato, Yunling took his hands off his abashed face and mentioned shakily that Su treated him quite well. Having seen too much, an exhausted emperor perched on the couch, expressing his displeasure that Su was fooling around with the poor lad. Out of sheer frustration, the emperor pinched his nose and ordered Yunling to bring his homework, and glad to be out of that bizarre situation, Yunling obliged readily. Several handwritten notes were handed to the emperor that were jotted down in childlike handwriting, having many mistakes. On reading those notes, the emperor was dumbfounded while a hesitant Yunling scratched his lowered head. Yunling explained that lately Su had been teaching him how to write well wishes, but unfortunately, he couldn't write them well and had shown a lack of ability. A disappointed emperor expressed annoyance about the nonsense being taught by Su to the lad. However, Shil Su defended herself and Yunling, stating that the notes on Yunling's homework were perfectly right, as children must always start with the basics. Additionally, Su proposed with a sly wink that as a descendant of royalty and born out of heaven, he would dare not give Yunling food just because he couldn't write that well. Satirically, the emperor retorted at Su, who was grinning like a Cheshire cat, that with her personality, she should have adopted a princess instead. Su chortled merrily, declaring that the fourth prince and she were destined to be together. A worn-out emperor gave up on Su, as he felt that being a little idiotic for a woman of character like her was tolerable. Cryptically, a meaningful smile appeared on Su's lips as she concurred with the emperor's opinion. Meanwhile, at another corner of the vast palace, an astonished voice echoed confirming the ridiculous news that Su dolled up the fourth young prince as a little girl. It was revealed that the same treacherous maid who was warned earlier by Su was being a loyal pet of Liu, giving her information about how Su was incompetently raising the prince. With an amused expression, the maid remarked that Su was raising a puppy or a kitten instead of a child. Winking out of hilarity, Liu pondered that she actually overestimated Su. It was quite clear that Su tore mountains to adopt a prince, and in the end, it turned out she was just finding a toy to kill her boredom. Suddenly, the maid broke into a cold sweat as she hesitantly mentioned a critical matter, and when she was encouraged by Liu to elaborate, the terrified maid took a sneak peek around. She disclosed apprehensively that the emperor had a few times mentioned the oldest prince born out of consort Shu with quite high praise. A malicious smile broke out on Liu's spiteful face, as she satisfactorily commented that Shu had foolishly taken over more responsibility than she could ever handle. At Su's apartment, the Pinky plushie was expressing his sheer wrath at Su for creating such a ludicrous scene in which she made a complete joke out of poor Yun Ling. Stretching at leisure, Su made a startling claim that Liu Ruyan hadn't given birth yet to a child. Twitching his face incessantly, the Pinky plushie tried to comprehend Su's earlier statement. A starry-eyed Su reminded the plushie about the procedure of women going into labor. Still not understanding what Su was getting at, the plushie puffed his face more in agitation, remarking at her sarcastically that she was being very kind, creating more enigma for him. Relishing his puffed hot air reaction, Su grinned ear to ear, informing him that she was flattered. Next, she reached out for the scissors on the table and assured the plushie not to fret over it, as consort Shu would definitely not go easy on Liu. Carefully, she trimmed the candle wick while advising him to enjoy the melodrama for a while and let the two consorts fight like Kilkenny cats, and then they would make their move. As the candle burnt brilliantly, illuminating Su's face, she pondered wickedly that they would certainly make their move to collect the remains of the cats. 6 months passed away in a jiff, and Su had been thoroughly enjoying herself witnessing a live killer cat fight that was more intriguing than any other TV show. Firstly, consort Shu accused Liu, claiming that the latter had been bullying consorts of a lower rank. Cleverly, Liu used her immense influence on the emperor and accused Shu of stealing from the royal treasury, causing the bird-brained emperor to be furious. The twist came when the older prince was caught in adultery with a menial consort, of course, planted by the very scheming Liu Ruyan. Clapping excitedly, Su Luxia recalled the setback caused consort Shu to collapse, and the oldest prince, who had the greatest chance of ascending to the throne, was exiled from the palace. Su Luxia sighed with concern and shook her head in disbelief as she actually underestimated Liu Ruyan's political mind and how she was beyond a menial harem catfight. Still pondering on the battle style, idly, Su smirked as she relished the style of whoever got caught was beaten, and basically one ace beating out all the trivial others. As usual, the plushie yelled into her ears, bringing her back to the real world and warning her that Liu Ruyan had given birth to a prince a few days ago and was about to be titled a noble consort. Solemnly, Su instructed the plushie to inform Yun Ling not to act like a clown anymore, as he was about to present a huge gift to Liu Ruyan. Meanwhile, a newborn baby was crying hysterically. With immense warmth on his face, the emperor referred to Liu that going through labor might be too painful for her. A worn-out Liu let out a faint cry, her face fully flushed due to immense exertion. Their beautiful moment together was rudely interrupted by a maid frantically announcing that there was a cause for great jubilance. Both the emperor and Liu were startled to see a furiously quivering maid on her knees, announcing that the heavens had given an auspicious sign. Hundreds of glittering crystal blue phoenixes swirled gracefully over the palace, while the fish danced merrily in circles under the clear water pond. Instantly, busybodies animatedly spread rumors about the little prince being chosen by heaven, as it might have recognized Lady Liu's sincerity, and also Phoenix symbolized an empress. Both Liu and the emperor were frozen to the ground by such a premonition. The king rejoiced on learning that the heavens indeed favored his dynasty, while Liu satisfactorily credited everything to the king's benevolence that touched the heavens. Greatly amused by the overflowing emotions, Su eavesdropped on the couple's conversation with a crafty smile. Confused by Su's tactics, the Pinky plushie wondered in vexation about the reason Su wasted an A-rank item to boost Liu Ruyan. Guffawing openly, Su explained to the flabbergasted plushie that she created all that drama just because she wanted Liu dead. Su reasoned that with that fake auspicious sign, everyone in the palace would think that Liu Ruyan was destined to be an empress, including herself. Poor plushie's little brain was already baked like a potato, as he still couldn't interpret Su's actual plan, as she continued that being promoted from a consort to a noble wife was a real favor. However, being promoted from a consort to an empress is completely worthless. Enchantingly, Su adjusted her head ornament, pulled up the collar of her robe, and proclaimed that she wanted Liu to be a step behind the empress's seat until death claimed her. With much toil, the poor plushie tried to climb up Su's shoulder and, while panting hard, inquired about her plan. Having a concerned look on her face, Su assured the anguished plushie. Cautiously, Su peeked out at the couple as she was waiting for someone. In no time, the wild card that Liu unintentionally handed over to Su approached the couple. The person paid his respects to his older brother and his sister-in-law. On a closer look, it was revealed that he was none other than the third wheel in the love story, Liu's childhood sweetheart and the emperor's younger stepbrother, the ninth prince. Su narrated that in the novel, to let Liu Ruyan have a better life in the palace, the ninth prince purposely created a koi blessing show that was a way to celebrate happiness. So that day when Liu gave birth to a prince, Su sent Liu a soaring phoenix, while the ninth prince sent her a koi blessing. While heading to her destination, Su pondered that as long as someone plucked out the evidence that the koi blessing was fake, then the soaring phoenix would be assumed to be Liu Ruyan's own scheme. With that, victorious Su felt a wave of pity hovering over her for the soon-to-be entangled Liu. Su paid her respects to Liu Ruyan and apologized for being late. With a forged display of joy, Liu welcomed Su. With a sugary demeanor, Liu placed a supporting hand on Su's shoulder, stating that it was a menial matter for Su to visit her younger sister. Posting a forced grin on her face, Su insisted that in order to celebrate the child's birth, she naturally had to bestow her blessings on Her Majesty. With a wry smile, Liu acknowledged her thoughtfulness. Out of the blue, Su feigned an astonished look as she pointed out the ninth prince's unexpected arrival. Out of respect, the ninth prince cupped his hands and bowed in front of Su. Su finally made an explosion about the story she had heard, that both Liu and the ninth prince were childhood sweethearts, and she could sense that special sentimental bond between them. It seemed as if both individuals were struck by lightning at Su's bluntness. Pretending to be upset by Su Luxia's heartless remark, Liu rushed towards the emperor and hid her face in his chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Thoroughly vexed, the virtually blind emperor yelled at Su. Innocently, Su tilted her head, wondering whether she'd blurted out anything senseless. Meanwhile, an uneasy shadow emerged on the ninth prince's face as his face dripped with droplets of sweat, and Su didn't know what was wrong with the term childhood sweethearts. Clinging tightly to the emperor's sleeve, a flustered Liu suddenly began to feel dizzy when Su protested that by sentimental bond, she never meant that they were romantically linked. Having a hurt expression as if perceived as wrongfully rude, Su inquired Liu about the reason for that unnecessary harshness. Even the emperor was dumbfounded for a moment as he grimly stared at Su. Liu frantically grabbed the emperor's sleeve tightly out of sheer anxiety. To gain the emperor's sympathy, a flushed Liu delicately tugged at his clothes, explaining that it was entirely her fault for misunderstanding Su's statements and that Su deserved an apology. Instantly, Liu bowed anxiously in front of Su, offering her apology. With a sneer, Su pulled Liu closer to her when Liu explained that a female's reputation was very fragile. She kind of panicked due to Su's acrid comment, and Su acknowledged her apology. Next, Su turned towards the ninth prince with a beam, wondering whether he also understood her statement. Still drenched with remorse, the ninth prince also bowed in front of Su, offering his apology. Being a great actress, Su pretended to be all fearful as the ninth prince kneeled in front of her, and she frenetically requested him to rise quickly. As Su smiled triumphantly, the pinky plushie sneaked his head out and simpered. The plushie admirably termed his host as quite petty. Su was not guilty at all, but blamed the ninth prince for not greeting her amiably in the first place. Soon, the emperor embraced Liu and the couple departed. Next, Su commanded the puzzled plushie to get all things ready. As she observed an abominable glare on the ninth prince's face as he saw the couple departing, Su ordered the plushie to help her find out the kind of food Liu Ruyan liked. She snickered clandestinely as the stage was set for the next milestone. Su resolved that she would prepare a grand meal for Liu Ruyan. A royal court had been summoned by the emperor, with Liu majestically perched beside him. As usual, the emperor was all praises for his new consort, as she had the honor of giving him an heir. While he announced that an auspicious date would be chosen for her to be promoted as an empress, a strange young man with a grim expression clenched his hands tightly. Meanwhile, a calm and serene Su Luxia beamed radiantly as if her life was about to be sorted, pondering the two types of pain, for something being attainable or already lost. A mysterious gleam appeared in her eyes as she thought of converting what was lost into something received. Meanwhile, Liu anxiously spotted something peculiar. She noticed that the emperor was feeling a little queasy as he rubbed his forehead out of discomfort. Worried sick, Liu further probed him, but he shook his head, claiming that his uneasiness was due to late-night reading, so Liu advised him to take care of himself like other official matters. Seeking the opportunity, the lioness rose from her seat and bellowed at the servants to call the doctor immediately. The blue patterned teacup began to tremble in the emperor's hand as his head suddenly spun like a top, and he faintly called out to Su. On the spur of the moment, the teacup crashed to the ground. Hysterically, Liu jumped out of her skin in terror when she saw the emperor fall from his full height to the ground. There were cries laced with panic in the room, and a chaotic situation occurred as the other damsels in distress didn't know what to do with the emperor. A deafening bawl by the chief lioness caused pin-drop silence in the room as she snarled at everyone to shut their sirens. Teary-eyed, Liu gazed at Su astonishingly. Su explained that the doctor would be here any minute and the emperor would be all right. As the ladies continued with their weeping session, a thoroughly annoyed Su threatened them that if anyone let out one more yelp, she would kill their family, and this made the ladies retreat. Still shedding tears from her crystal blue eyes, Liu was skeptical whether Su knew about the emperor's illness. She put on that babyish expression on her face and inquired Su about the doctor's arrival. However, Su gave her a cold shoulder and austerely called out to the servants to carry the emperor to bed and wait for the physician's arrival. Later, the doctor came over and examined the king. Impatiently, Liu inquired the doctor about the emperor's health. The doctor replied that the king had gotten a seasonal cold. All the other maidens let out a distressed sigh, while Su kept her composure and grilled the physician that the matter couldn't be taken lightly and whether he was certain about his findings. Confidently, the physician assured her that he was 90% sure about his findings. Finally, Su paid some attention to Liu as she meaningfully stated that someone would have to stay to take care of the emperor. Liu's face turned a tinge of blue on hearing Su's proposal, thinking that Su Luxia must know something. Seeing reluctance on Liu's face, Su then inquired of the other maidens, who broke into distressed whispers. With a satisfied look, Su smugly was about to offer herself when Liu interrupted her in the middle, saying that she was willing to stay with her beloved emperor. Shocked to the core, Su turned her head toward Liu. Liu melodramatically bowed, stating that she, the imperial wife, was willing to care for her husband and relieve the burdens on her sister's shoulders. Liu respectfully lowered herself more. Still beaming cryptically, Su advised Liu not to stress herself out. However, deep inside she was thoroughly relieved that the scheming redhead finally stepped up. With puppy dog eyes and rivers flowing out of them, Liu begged Su to grant her wish, while deep inside she was adamant not to miss the opportunity to be on the emperor's side. Seeing her urge, the other maidens whispered enviedly about the passion and love Liu had for the emperor. Nonchalantly, Su turned around to leave the room, leaving everything to Liu since she was being so desperate. Anxiously, Liu bowed in front of the doctor requesting his help, and the old doctor assured her that he would try his best. Soon, those blue ponds brimmed up with water as Liu hoped that her beloved emperor would recover soon. Eerily, she kept on thinking about Su Luxia keeping something from her. While in deep thought, Liu clenched her hand on her front, assuring herself that if Su knew anything, she wouldn't have given her the opportunity. In the palace, the pink plushie apprehensively wondered if Su knew that the emperor didn't acquire an epidemic rash. A concerned plushie inquired Su about the reason she allowed Liu to boost her relationship with the emperor. However, an aloof Su kept on popping raspberries into her mouth. While casually chewing the fruit and peeling off another one, Su imparted her wisdom to the plushie. In a cheating relationship, an infidel spouse always deserved death more than the third wheel. She recalled distressfully that in that world where Liu died a tragic death, Su didn't know that an epidemic rash was the wrong prognosis. Still, being a dutiful wife, Su took the initiative and took care of the emperor without rest and with much effort. In that way, she was able to divert the king's attention towards herself, along with a glorious life of luxury with many personal attendants. At present, the reincarnated version of Liu Ruyan wanted to be the same dutiful spouse Su had been the last time. Liu was working really hard to appease the emperor, to control the whole harem single-handedly, and to have an unlimited life of luxury. An illuminative smile played on Su's rosy lips. Pondering if Liu wanted to fulfill those wishes, then Su would definitely provide her an opportunity to earn them. Meanwhile, the adoring emperor was further subdued by Liu's uprightness and awarded her with a piece of jewelry. A faithful servant offered to go into the emperor's chamber and announce Su's arrival. However, Su refused. She indifferently walked away while the servant trembled in panic. It seemed he was really afraid of Su's presiding personality. While walking toward the emperor's room, Su snickered at the thought of an interesting twist in the storyline in which lovers were suspicious of each other and ready to slit each other's throats. Recovering from his illness, the emperor faintly queried the attendant about Lady Liu and learned that she went to prepare a medicinal meal for him in the kitchen while he was asleep. With an affectionate smile, the emperor proclaimed that such trivial jobs should be handled by servants. The servant implied that it was just a token of Lady Liu's affection for him. Out of the blue, a sharp voice caught their attention, inquiring about the hyped-up act of affection, and the emperor turned his head with a frown. A chirpy and bubbly Su entered the room, noticing the sunny mood of the emperor, predicting that the 9th prince might have brought some good news to him. A puzzled expression engraved on the emperor's face when he reflected on the 9th prince's presence. Pretending to be baffled, Su informed the emperor that she just bumped into him hurriedly leaving outside. Carefully choosing her words, a perplexed Su expressed her doubts, hoping the emperor had summoned him to discuss matters of the state. The frown on his face deepened when he thoughtfully mentioned that he didn't call the 9th prince for any meeting. Very slyly, Su threw an arrow at the target by hinting that she saw the 9th prince coming from the direction of the kitchen. Vexedly, the emperor bellowed when he learned that the prince was coming from the kitchen. Adding fuel to the already lit volcano, Su expressed her curiosity, hinting at the possible timing. She found it odd that the prince had no business in such a place. But after creating such hype about the unthinkable possibility, Su, with all her charm, guessed that the prince might be in love with one of the maids in the kitchen, but was too shy to confide in him. Coyly, Su tugged at the emperor's sleeve, gaining his attention. While massaging his gently, Su reminded him of the effort the 9th prince had put into their country and coaxed the king to help him achieve his goal. Quite icily, the emperor feared that the 9th prince had become ambitious and had set his eye on someone other than an ordinary maid. With a crafty smile, Su expressed her curiosity about the king's allegations and informed him that the anxious prince often came to the palace to inquire about his health. She pretended to be still infatuated with her husband as she leaned on his chest, implying that with such a level of devotion from the 9th prince, even she felt threatened. While the one-sided romantic tete-a-tete was going on, it was interrupted by a smiling Liu, who was pleased to see that the emperor was already awake and Su was with him. As she placed the hot bowl of soup in front of him, she remarked that ever since the emperor got sick, that was the first time she had seen Su. She innocently threw a dagger at Su, stating that probably she had come for a visit as soon as she learned that the emperor was getting better. Instantly, the emperor pulled away from Su coldly, stating that if she had no other business, she should leave. He especially mentioned that with his beloved Liu, he didn't need anyone else to stay. Immensely hurt by the emperor's icy words, Su turned away. But just before leaving his room, Su resolved to play the role of a damsel in distress, stating that she never feared death and all she wanted was for him to live a prosperous life. As she swiftly dashed out of the room, Liu secretly sneered and cursed at Su. Observing the emperor lost in deep thought, Liu purposely slammed the soup bowl to the ground, causing the hot soup to scathe her skin. Immediately, the emperor came to his senses, holding her burnt hand and apologizing for the trouble he had caused. Meanwhile, in her room, Su inquired whether all preparations were complete. Lowering her gaze, the maid affirmed that she had already passed the information to the head personal maid from consort Shu's side. Satisfied, Su lauded the maid for her effort and dismissed her. As Su casually sipped her tea, the maid paid her respects to her and departed. Curiously, the pink plushie wondered about their next step. Playfully, Sue poked the plushie and explained that now they would help Consort Shu in her little act in a show. She elaborated that they would cook a nice hot meal for Liu Ruyan. Later, a musical was arranged in the palace, in which the two protagonists exchanged romantic dialogues as part of a play. The emperor expressed curiosity about the dialogue when an attendant replied that they were singing about the story of Simon Ting and Pan Jinlian from the previous dynasty. Watching the two lovebirds in a passionate embrace, the attendant mentioned that the heroine betrayed her husband to have an affair with the hero, and the duo killed the husband. Artfully, the attendant patted the bag of silver given by Consort Shu as bribery. Next, he gave his opinion to the emperor that if the heroine's husband hadn't been so insensitive, he might have been alive and helped Hyman bring up a son. His comments ignited the wrath of the emperor, who exploded at him to shut his mouth. It seemed as if his stealth had been caught. Instantly, the play was halted while the actors, along with the attendant, kneeled and bowed to the ground, requesting an apology from the furious king. Fiercely, the emperor stormed out of the room, declaring that such spiteful poems and romantic songs were not to be sung in the palace ever. As darkness prevailed over the palace, Liu was informed by an attendant that the emperor had already turned in for the night. This came as a surprise to Liu, who wondered why the king went to sleep so early. However, the servant apologized to the lady, explaining that he could not reveal the reason. Sheepishly, Liu smiled politely at the attendant for the information and announced that she would be leaving soon. Immediately, she turned around to head back to her room. Her face darkened with intense wrath, wondering what was cooking behind her back. Meanwhile, austerely, the emperor grilled his personal attendant about a crucial matter. Stuttering out of hesitation, the attendant revealed that just like the 9th prince, Lady Su also came over every day, but when she saw that the emperor was busy with Liu, she returned. Trembling with fear and sweating heavily, the attendant disclosed that sometimes when Su saw he was asleep and alone, she would come in, take a look, and wipe off his sweat. With closed eyes, the emperor inquired about Lady Liu. Apprehensively, the attendant mentioned that although Liu treated the emperor quite well, it was just at times when the 9th prince came, and with that, the attendant began to falter. Smelling fish, the emperor snarled at the attendant to speak immediately. Terrified to the core, the attendant kneeled down, disclosing that Liu would just accompany him for a chat. Frenetically, the servant added that he was the witness of their secure conversations, and no words that should not have been spoken were exchanged between the two. The emperor sat on a chair and repeated the phrase, "words that should not be spoken." Sarcastically, he probed the attendant about those words that should not be exchanged between a man and a woman. At the spur of the moment, raging with fury, the emperor threw a cup at the attendant and rolled at him to get lost. Very much frightened, the attendant ran for his life as fast as he could. Meanwhile, there was a sudden commotion as Lady Shu created a ruckus to meet the emperor in urgency while the guards were trying their best to stop her. A frowning emperor wondered about the chaos and demanded their nerve to create such a maddening scene. Out of the blue, a blaring consort Shu barged into the emperor's room and informed him that she had something to tell him. Silence invaded the emperor as he was forced to listen to Lady Shu, who accused Liu of committing adultery at the palace gates with another man and even giving birth to his child. Su was suddenly summoned by the emperor, and she acknowledged his invitation without any trace of astonishment, as if she were expecting it. As she checked her reflection in the mirror, she pondered that Lady Shu had made her move then. Still, a heavily panting plushie didn't understand that Lady Shu, who lost the emperor's favor ages ago, was chosen as a sword in hand by a clever Su. While hanging danglers in her ears, Su remarked intelligently that Shu was quite useful to her. She continued that 15 days ago, the eldest prince was put under house arrest and then tragically he committed suicide. While tainting her lips with color, Shu mentioned that with the dead holding the respect, the emperor originally intended for him to be buried under the title of Crown Prince. However, the matter was quickly forgotten due to Liu's amazing performance in bed, and the plushie could guess how much Shu hated Liu, as she'd be willing to eat her alive. In an ominous setting, a royal court had been summoned where in front of the emperor a maid and an attendant were kneeled down. Pretending to be drowsy, a fully decked-up Su emerged. Though she was expecting that summons, she acted aloof as she inquired what matter so grave required her presence so late at night. Next, she spotted a petrified Liu nervously chewing on a handkerchief. Gleefully noticing the guilty posture of Liu, Su guessed that they were in some kind of jury trial. On Su's entry, an anguished emperor informed consort Shu that the witness she wanted had arrived and requested her to continue. Snickering secretly, Shu obliged readily. Shu narrated that the day before Liu gave birth, the 9th prince bribed a servant who was a good swimmer, asking him to set up specific feeding spots underwater to manipulate the fish. Hence, that resulted in a coy blessing prosperous sign. At present, that swimmer servant was kneeling down in front of the emperor, begging for mercy to spare his life. An astonished Su commented that the 9th prince was definitely full of ideas, and then an idea struck her that the soaring phoenix that day. Her words were chopped in by Shu, who concurred with her that the soaring phoenix idea was fake too. With that, Shu stood up sternly and summed up furiously that this was a matter of deceiving others in elaborate terms. She menacingly pointed at an anxious Liu, stating that it was a matter of trying to get the son of a characterless woman to become the crown prince, causing a chaotic situation in the country. A jittery Liu fell on her knees in front of the emperor, trying helplessly to clarify her situation and ready to make a vow that she was completely unaware of the situation. She desperately crawled towards the emperor's feet, defending the 9th prince, saying he didn't have such motives. Roughly, the emperor held Liu's chin and tilted it upwards. Smiling icily, the emperor queried Liu about what she was going to use her vow on. Catching a U-turn in the emperor's otherwise affectionate behavior, Liu was dumbfounded. Bored with the court drama, Su couldn't believe that a foolish Liu had lived for 2 lifetimes, so she tried to interject. Su intervened that there was also a maid kneeling on the ground, and she wondered about her crime. Pleasantly, Shu reminded Su to look at the maid carefully, as she might be able to recognize her. Shu reminded Su that she was the one who caught hold of the illicit affair first, saying that the maid in question was secretly transporting gifts outside the palace. Pretending to be absent-minded, Su vaguely tried to recall such an occurrence. Thoroughly enjoying her dramatic performance, Shu wondered when Su became so forgetful, as she was the one who found Liu's embroidered pouch. Terrified to the core, the maid touched her head on the ground, explaining that she was just helping Lady Liu pass along some personal items and didn't know those were love tokens. A drained Liu stared unbelievingly at the maid, recalling that she never treated her unfairly, and yet she was also helping others to frame her. A wailing Liu tugged at the emperor's clothes desperately. With a tear-drenched face, she begged that although others didn't believe her, she wondered whether he also doubted the feelings she had for him. She leaned her forehead against his legs, sobbing uncontrollably. She could swear upon her life about the purity of her feelings. An intrigued Su was in her complete movie-watching mode, munching down on snacks, while a weeping Liu insisted that there were no romantic feelings between the 9th prince and her. Tearfully, Liu explained that he was just looking at their childhood friendship and feared she was having a hard life in the palace, so he just wanted to know about her well-being. Tears began to furiously roll down her cheeks as she asserted that in her heart there was only room for the emperor. Melodramatically, Liu stated a verse that the sash of her dress wrapped twice around her waist, and she wished it to bind the two of them together. It was revealed that the above poetic verse was written by the emperor himself, and he had forgotten all about it. The austere expression on the emperor's face mellowed a bit as it seemed that he was also deeply smitten by Liu Ruyan. He recollected those joyous times when Liu and he were together. A heavy sigh was emitted by the king, and he explained that he originally didn't doubt her, but just needed to provide Shu and others an explanation. Then he wiped off Liu's tears. Out of the blue, Su spat out whatever she was eating as she had a fit of laughter. Furiously, the emperor wondered about the reason for Su's boorish act. Leisurely, Su licked her chocolate-smeared lips, pointing at the living evidence who was still kneeling on the ground, trembling hard. Su also implied at the enraged consort Shu and mentioned that he was too quick to close the case so abruptly. With a thud, the emperor angrily slammed his hand over the armrest of his throne, barking at Su Luxia for crossing her line. Unexpectedly, Shu fell to the ground, begging the emperor that there was not a satisfactory explanation from Liu's side and that the king must think twice before closing the matter. A perplexed emperor demanded the course of action, as just basing matters off the testimonies of 2 servants, Liu couldn't be sentenced to death. Calmly, Su Luxia chipped in, concurring with the emperor that the words of servants couldn't be trusted. Then she solemnly suggested the testimony of the ninth prince. Instantly, Liu glanced nervously at Su as she continued that recently Liu had given birth to an heir to the throne for the emperor, so they could always go for a blood affinity verification check. Surprisingly, Liu gave her consent to whatever the emperor ordered, and she let out a sigh of relief since the little prince was the emperor's biological son anyway. Fretfully, the emperor ordered the servants to bring the little prince here and prepare for a blood affinity verification check. Unexpectedly, Liu intervened, to Shu and Su's curiosity. Liu bowed in front of the emperor and requested that for the sake of fairness, the personal attendant from the king's side should make the preparations as she couldn't trust anyone else. Immediately, the personal attendant appeared and bowed as he got the emperor's consent. After a while, the attendant brought forth the little prince. Another servant came forward and bowed, carrying a huge blue bowl. In great enigma, the ninth prince inquired the emperor about his sudden summons into the palace. Firmly, the attendant grabbed the prince's hand and carried a sharp needle in his other hand, instructing him not to move. Alarmed by that sudden ambush, the ninth prince's eyes widened in panic. Next, his blood from the finger was trickled into the blue bowl full of water. At the same time, the baby's finger was also pricked, and his blood was also collected in the bowl. Serenely watching the whole scene, Su inquired the plushie whether he knew the reason the later generation had always ridiculed the traditional paternity tests. This is because the blood diffuses in the water due to osmotic pressure and density, so even if the ninth prince and the baby were related or not, their blood would always mix with the water. Hilariously, even if a rat was brought and its blood was tested like that, the baby would have been considered the rat's son, so by not knowing real science, people could be killed. So, as usual, both the ninth prince's and the little baby's blood spread evenly into the water. Eventually, the emperor became dangerously pale out of a volcanic rage. As a fierce reaction, he slapped hard on Liu's face, leaving an angry red print on her cheek, calling her characterless. A stunned Liu was thrown off guard, and trembling hard, she couldn't understand what was going on since she was pure in that regard. Deeply terrorized, Liu sobbed hard, begging the emperor that she had been framed, and suggested if even he should also do the blood test. Next, she spotted both Shu and Su smirking at her pathetic condition and accused them of secretly tampering with the test. Sarcastically, Su condemned Liu for making the emperor witness his incompatibility through his own eyes and then getting insulted again. Out of the blue, consort Shu accused Liu that apart from deceiving the emperor, she even tried to harm his health. Frowning with wrath, the emperor listened to Shu warning him that not killing Liu would yield dissatisfaction among the populace. Weeping hysterically, Liu shook her head, clarifying her position desperately. While pouring herself a cup of tea, Su was about to throw another explosive. She expressed her concern that if the ninth prince only wanted Liu to live a better life, a koi blessing should already be auspicious, yet he also performed a soaring phoenix ceremony. Su ignited the bomb by sinisterly turning towards an alarmed Liu, grilling her about the reason the ninth prince would push her up to the throne. Next, she finally created an explosion that whatever he did was for his illegitimate child, and both the emperor and Liu were dumbfounded. Su kept on bombing that the ninth prince wanted his own son to inherit the throne, and that was a sign of rebellion. Liu let out a faint cry as she herself was numb with shock. Distressfully, the emperor closed his eyes. Then he gestured at the guards to seal the ninth prince's mouth and drag him away. Obligingly, the guards grabbed the jittery ninth prince, as he was not allowed to talk to anyone nor communicate with the outside world while waiting for his punishment. Poor ninth prince tried his level best to clarify his position, but the emperor was not ready to listen, and he was dragged away. As for Liu, she was stripped of all her titles and was ordered to be moved to the lane of perpetuity, where women of the harem lived. Those blue crystals had lost all their previous glimmer and were filled with salty water as Liu tried for the last time to make the emperor believe in her purity. Coldly, the emperor turned away and left, instructing the guards that Liu would not be allowed to go outside without explicit permission. Liu desperately cried for the emperor. However, she was mercilessly dragged away. Lastly, the treacherous servants were commanded to be executed, and both individuals cried for mercy. Ursually, the emperor glared at both Shu and Su and declared that they both were on their own. With that, he stormed out of the royal courtroom, slamming the door behind him. Finally, Sue gleefully praised Shu for her excellent performance. However, a solemn-faced Shu disclosed that she knew it was Sue who sent someone to confide in her about Liu Ruyan. With her gleaming jade-green eyes, Shu revealed that she always wanted that characterless Liu to die. That's why she decided to become a pawn in Sue's hands. Still, she warned Sue that she was foolish to assume that she had earned the Emperor's favor by eliminating Liu from her way. Consort Shu was trying to explain that since Sue disclosed the matter regarding Liu's affair, the Emperor would despise her as a result. Shu concurred that the day's events would become an abominable memory for the Emperor. Precariously, she portrayed a gruesome picture that from now onwards, whenever the Emperor would see her, he would remember the shame he felt that day, and she would become unfavored. Sinisterly, she whispered into Sue's ears that Liu might have lost, but even Sue didn't win as well. Smart Alex Sue immediately blocked the venomous transmission passing through her ears into her brain, as she had no interest in those trivial harem games. With a huge grin, Sue politely pushed Shu away, stating that she had no desire to join her palace's out-of-favor consort's alliance. Dumbfounded with shock, Shu gazed blankly as Sue coolly took her leave. Darkness spread like a blanket over the palace as Sue headed toward her room. Agitated by the Emperor's coldness, the pinky plushie agreed with Shu that the rascal Emperor wouldn't let them off that easily. Out of stress, the poor plushie began to wriggle and jiggle wildly. Sue was as calm as a valley lake. Affectionately, she stroked the plushie's head, reminding him that the scoundrel woman Liu was finally penalized. Walking calmly in the dead of the night, the starry-eyed Sue exclaimed that there was no use in keeping that infidel emperor alive. Meanwhile, in the lane of perpetuity, which seemed like a prison for discarded harem women, Liu was sitting staring at the ground blankly in a questionable mental state. Insanely, she was mumbling non-stop as she still hoped that the cold-hearted emperor would pay her a visit. Suddenly, the old door creaked open, and with hopeful eyes, Liu searched for the emperor. To her utter disappointment, it was Su Luxia who had the nerve to pay her a visit. Wild with madness, Liu had a raging outburst. Rubbing her ears, an agitated Su tried to quieten down the loud and obnoxious Liu Ruyan and explained that she had just come here as a favor to someone. Instantly, she tossed an item toward Liu that Liu had entrusted someone to hand to the emperor. Unbelievingly, Liu stared at the crimson piece of jewelry that the emperor had heartlessly returned to her with a message that the knot of love had come undone, never to meet again. Thoroughly distracted, Liu shook her head vigorously as she couldn't believe the emperor could be so cold toward her and accused Su of lying to her. On the verge of lunacy, Liu anxiously begged Su to let her meet the emperor as her heart knew that he wouldn't treat her like that. Feeling slightly sympathetic for Liu, Su mentioned that Liu must know what happened to the 9th prince. Fretfully, Liu stared blankly at Su. Su broke the melancholic news to her that this morning the emperor personally went to visit the imprisoned 9th prince and then make him drink poison. Rivers of unimaginable gloom flowed from Liu's eyes. Elsewhere, in some prison, a poisoned 9th prince called out desperately for his beloved Liu Ruyan. Instantly, a raging Liu attacked Su, but a vigilant consort swiftly held her hand. Bloodthirsty like a hound, Liu barked at Su for framing her, causing the death of the 9th prince and, of course, diminishing her love from the emperor's heart. Nonchalantly, Su released Liu's hand, causing her to fall back. Unable to hold her frustration, Su called her a fool while a stunned Liu looked at her. Grinning ear to ear, Su raised her chin intriguingly, wondering about Liu's level of intelligence and the way she actually got reincarnated. It was revealed that both ladies were actually part of a virtual game, as Su wondered whether Liu was paying premium in the game. Our video ends here. If you loved this story, please subscribe to the channel. See you next time. Bye bye.